Okay, so let's take a look at this. Up till now, we've been working with expressions where we simplify, which is the answer to the first question there. So what about equations? When we have a single variable equation, what do? We solve them. As opposed to what we have been doing, which is simplifying when we have an expression. And I forgot to give a space, so just write it in here. So when I say solve, I want you to get the variable alone on one side of the equal sign. And just how do we do that? Well, we're going to work our way backwards through the order of operations. Is this always the case? No, but it's a good rule of thumb. The only exception being parentheses. Parentheses still kind of you deal with first. So the big thing that we got to talk about today is an inverse. And an inverse is how you go about solving equations with a variable in them. So an inverse is an opposite operation. So the opposite of addition would be subtraction, and the opposite of multiplication is going to be division. And with addition and subtraction, if you were to add 9, the opposite of adding 9 is going to be to subtract 9, right? And that would bring us back to 0. Where with multiplication division, if you were to multiply by 3, the opposite of multiplying by 3 would be to divide by 3, and that would bring you back to 1. So that might make a little bit more sense once we look at the examples. But the main idea here, we take the inverse. We have to identify the operation and then take its inverse. For example, our end goal, remember, is to solve, so we want x to be alone on one side of the equal sign, right? We've got our two sides of the equal sign. So if I want to have x be by itself, I've got to get rid of this plus 14. And so the opposite of plus 14 or positive 14 is going to be negative 14. Positive 14 and negative 14 cancel each other out. And here's the big idea. Whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So if I subtract 14 on the right, I also have to subtract 14 on the left. Otherwise, they wouldn't be equal anymore. So 14 minus 14 is 0. 18 minus 14 is 4. So our final answer would be x equals 4. It's kind of important. We should stop for a minute and just make a little note to ourselves. Whatever we do to one side, we also do to the other. Words to live by with equations. So let's take a look at this next one up here. So I've got my variable, and my variable is on the right-hand side. So if I wanted my variable to be alone, right, if I wanted it to look like this, v equals something, I'm going to have to get rid of this divide by 20. So the opposite of dividing by 20 is going to be to multiply by 20. And what I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So if I multiply one side by 20, I've got to multiply the other side by 20 as well. So 20 divided by 20 is 1. So that gives us 1v, right? And we generally don't write the 1. We just write it as v if we've got 1v. And then 20 times 19 is 380. But 20 times negative 19 is going to be negative 380. So our final answer, v is alone on one side of the equal sign. The final answer is negative 380. Let's go to this one over here. And why don't you take a minute and see if you can do that one all on your own. Pause the video and see if you can get it. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do, let's establish my two sides, right? And x is on the right-hand side, and I want it to be by itself. So I've got to get rid of this 6, and I've also got to get rid of this times negative 9. So let's get rid of the 6 by the opposite of positive 6 is going to be negative 6. What I do to one side, I'm going to do to the other, so I'll subtract 6 from both sides. So 6 minus 6 cancels out, and I am left with negative 9x. Negative 48 minus 6 gives us negative 54. If I owed you $48 and I borrowed another 6, I would owe you 48. So now I've got this times negative 9x. So the opposite of times negative 9 is going to be to divide by negative 9. So 9 divided by 9 is 1. Negative divided by negative is a positive. So 54 divided by 9 gives us 6. And then a negative divided by a negative is going to be a positive. So negative 54 divided by negative 9 is positive 6. Let's take one more minute and see if you can do this one. Pause the video and see if you can do this one first. Okay, so we have our two sides of the equation, and I've got b on the left-hand side this time, so I want b to equal something, and there be nothing else on the left. So that means I've got to get rid of this minus 1, and I've also got to get rid of this divide by 4. So this is what I mean when I said we're going to work our way backwards through the order of operations. It's much easier to just kind of, if this is my order of operations, it's kind of easier to go this way and just go, let's get rid of the addition and subtraction first, then we'll do the multiplication and division, then the exponents. Again, just kind of a rule of thumb, doesn't always work, but it certainly works now. So let's get rid of this minus 1. We're getting rid of the addition and subtraction first. So the opposite of negative 1 is going to be positive 1. So I'm going to add 1 to both sides. So negative 1 and positive 1 is 0, which leaves us with b divided by 4. And 5 plus 1 is 6. So now I got to get rid of this divide by 4. And the opposite of dividing by 4 is going to be to multiply by 4. What I do to one side, I do to the other. So 4 divided by 4 cancels out, leaves us with 1b, and 6 times 4 gives us 24. So that would be our final answer. B is 24. So what I want you to do is I want you to go ahead and try some of these problems here. You've got 10 of them to do, and some of them are one-step problems like we just did. Some of them are these two-step problems like the second two examples. And I want you to make sure you're checking all your answers before you turn them in, and you can get them back to me as soon as you can.